Welcome to the Insights to Communicate podcast with Adam Probalski, where communications, research, and strategy come together.
Ryan Hanser, welcome to the podcast. Thanks a ton for being here.
My pleasure.
So I have seen you speak. I have seen you in the community. You're very civically engaged. You run a PR shop. Why don't you tell the world your journey, how you got to the place you are, and what you kind of focus on for a living?
Yeah, I mean, we all heard what we would be when we grew up, and I'm not sure where I fell along the way. To the extent that I studied communication and journalism, I think I was destined to do something communicative. And so after a whole bunch of figuring out what I didn't want to do, I ended up working at what was at the time Iowa's first full service PR firm, and here we are 27 years later, and it's still happening. So I think it was really around this idea that and you have to remember, this is the 90s, right? So even in that era, it was this idea that like it would be really hard to over communicate, and the need to communicate would be very large, and so there would always be room for people who wanted to write, etc. And that was what drew me into the agency world. I think the thing about having a firm is just the diversity of perspectives that come from client organizations as well as client contacts. And then to the extent that you're into it, the diversity of industries. One of the things that Hanser and Associates has stuck with over time is avoiding too narrow of an industry concentration, to the extent that best practices in public relations translate across industry. Our concentration in healthcare and financial services and tech is still pretty loose. There's 31 flavors of folks who need a hand, and we're here for it.
I think there's big value also in having a broader spectrum of clients, because for clients, you have a bigger perspective. If you just do tech and you never get the advantage of understanding what healthcare is doing or what education is doing or what government is doing, you don't kind of keep on top of all the latest innovations. So I think for clients who want a practitioner who's going to have a big picture of how the world works, I think that's great. Hopefully they appreciate. Do you find it that clients appreciate that bigger picture?
Yeah, I mean, it's all context, right? Everything is context, and we're supposed to context shift constantly now. But I think it is maybe to your point that something that works well elsewhere might work in a different land. I think people, social animals, behave very similarly in almost every context, and so I think there's a lot that can be transferred from one space to another. Yeah.
You mentioned where you are. You're in Iowa.
Yeah.
I imagine a decent amount of your clients are on the coasts, and a lot of the people listening are on the coasts. America doesn't always think about the middle so much. How is being in Iowa and being in the big world of PR and communications, how does that, advantage you, disadvantage you? What's the difference?
I've actually got a working phrase called farm sourcing.
Okay.
We have had at regular intervals across time folks who call us from the coasts, and they have a need. It might be geographic, right? It might be very specifically like, hey, I need to be in Illinois or wherever it is. And so we're here for like the geographic work, but it's also just generally true that cost of living is lower here, so professional services as an hourly rate is probably more accessible to smaller organizations. Yeah, that's all true. One of the most interesting journeys we went on with a client was Megabus. They're actually Scottish, but they had this idea that stateside they wanted to launch in Chicago, and so PR firm Des Moines ends up taking them into, I think, a brand most people would know today as a transportation option, particularly on the East Coast.
Right. Ah, very cool. I have heard you speak about third-party endorsers, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but kind of how people, maybe gloss over when you start talking about yourself. Do you want to kind of clue us in on that? I think it feels like that's like a central part, perhaps, of how you approach the communications business.
Right, because we all trust a person like ourselves, right? So if we're trying to activate a campaign or program, like that's it. Who is the person that is important? Who's the stakeholder, and who are their peers? And among those peers, do they see the opportunity or the challenge the way that we do, and can we affect change behaviorally or otherwise together? And that, I think that's always been true, but I think it's more true in an era now where we're all very self-referential. The internet is how we kind of check our own expectations. Word of mouth is still there, especially offline, but I think in a world where trust and attention are really not in a healthy place, that peer voice is really important. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I'd love to pivot a little bit. If you look at your resume or your LinkedIn, I guess, you've got this long history of being involved in civic organizations, nonprofits, really engaging in things outside of what I expect are your money making opportunities. I really have a high appreciation for those things. I did a lot of those things, commissioners and positions and nonprofit board, as when I was younger, actually. But tell us, maybe what the value of that is. That just kind of because you believe in that sort of thing? Does it help business? Is it something you preach to others?
I think there are really a couple reasons why I've been civically engaged for really my whole life. One, it was modeled. I mean, the people that I think that got my attention, the adults in my life who had my attention, were those who were serving others. And there's just something about building community and serving others that has, for those who have done it, you understand the rewards are intrinsic. They're there. I think the other thing is just about attachment to place. Um, I'd like to think that we all have a place we feel attached to. And so, Des Moines, Iowa has been my home. And so when there have been ways to make Iowa or Central Iowa or Des Moines a better place, and there's something that I can do professionally or otherwise, yes is a dangerous answer, but it's generally my default when it comes to such things. And then I do think there are so we're all a product of our experience, right? And I would submit that serving on boards of directors and serving as a volunteer next to all these other kinds of organizational structures is just always a study in what works and especially what doesn't. And governance is this thing that often is somewhere on the other end of the phone when an organization calls and they're in trouble. I think that the things that the fires and the earthquakes and the acts of God, if you will, those are generally not reputational crisis. Unless the organization fails to react to those things, they don't have a problem. But the governance issues, the slow burning thing that everybody kind of ignored that eventually destroyed them. Yeah. I think people in PR see that all the time. And so there is the constant study in kind of organizational effectiveness and leadership that I'll never get tired of professionally, and certainly when it comes to making positive change in the communities and issues that I care about. Like I'm going to be at that table.
Is there one specific civic or nonprofit activity you do or you've done in the past that like was the most fun, that you enjoyed the most, that you most rewarding?
Well, we all have seasons of life. When I was a younger gentleman, we really did a lot. There was a constituency here in Iowa who used bicycles to explore natural lands. And, California had its own kind of argument about what is a mountain bike and does it belong. But by the time that reached middle America, it was really a way of accessing natural resources and working to protect them. And as a new constituency, there had to be a lot of trust built around that. So I spent, more than a decade understanding kind of what land owners and land managers, Department of Natural Resources and Conservation at the county level, and even city parks folks, like what they were trying to get done, and how trails, regardless of how you're using them, how they are a way to protect a resource and in part by growing the appreciation of it. And so I think the takeaway from all of that time was really about like to know something, to really appreciate and know and love something is to protect it, is to work for it, and like to have that rally is usually pretty durable, especially when you need it, when things are getting rough. Like to know that there is a purpose that is meaningful as a way to help people work together when it really matters. So
That is fantastic. It's a great transition to my next question, but we do research, public opinion research and market research, and a ton of the work we do is for government. And one of the things we see the most is really people who love trails and open space and parks, and activating those places can really build trust. I mean, if you get someone to stand on your piece of property, they're going to trust you and they're going to want to help you and support you. So, yeah, it may be incongruent for some people's minds. Wait a second, you're going to put people in this place you're trying to preserve. Well, aren't you going to hurt it? No, no, no. We're going to bring people there and they're going to want to preserve it forever. And they're going to be just as judicious with the resources as anybody because they want it to be there for the next time and their next generation. So it makes total sense to me. So let's talk about that for a minute. How does research, public opinion research, market research, polling, surveys, focus groups, how does that feature in your work? I find that in the PR world, it's kind of like we wish we could, but most of our clients can't afford it or don't want to spend money on it. They don't get the purpose and we don't bother to explain it to them. Is that how it works, or do you do it a lot more or a lot less? How does it work in your business?
there are always going to be clients for whom they might be less inclined to invest in the certainty that comes from research, because what do you know and how do you know it is usually one of those first order questions.
Right.
And sometimes that question just needs to sit in the air for a little bit for people to understand, like, what's your risk, what's your risk tolerance for getting this wrong. And moreover, I think when we look at engagements, particularly program engagements, where you really are trying to build relationships over time, and the reputation management is just a management function. Research, I would frame it really as the thing that is ensuring that the two-way communication is happening, right? It's one thing to go and say something to somebody, but are they the right people? Do they care? How likely are they to act? I mean, I think there is more value than we probably have time to talk about understanding the attitudes and beliefs, as well as the behaviors of the people who are important to an organization. So yeah, we're and I would offer that the other thing we've done on the research front occasionally, but not recently, is just to go ahead and do it ourselves. We real early in the life of the firm did just basic survey work that was asking executives and journalists in Iowa about how they felt about each other.
Oh, interesting.
And then and publishing that, and there was insight for us,
Right.
but there was also insight for the good of all in doing our jobs better, right? Similarly, when clearly the internet was a big deal and maybe social media was going to be a thing, we started doing survey work about that too. And again, it was to inform our own practice, but also to share with all the organizations who were basically all doing it. So I think, for ourselves and for clients, it's always, what do you know and how do you know it?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great. And yeah, if it doesn't work to do it, you don't do it, but going into it that you don't have the true numbers, the true details. I think that's smart. Okay, so along the way, you had a mentor, you had a guide, someone that you can point to and say, that person is a big part of my success. Who is that person?
Well, Hanser Associates is a family business. It was founded by my parents.
Okay.
So that's like an on the nose answer, right?
Yep.
That there was a point in time where I had learned a lot through a corporate M&A investor relations gig, and they had grown that firm out of the basement, and we we had lunch where it was like, hey, what would it be like to work together? And you don't know till you go.
Right.
But that endured for almost 20 years. So that's an obvious answer. But I do think that the folks who have been who kind of the faces that emerge when you ask a question like that are really the leaders of organizations who had the courage to like do the right thing and then talk about it, because I think that's the proper order. I've seen people who their heart's in the right place but they aren't acting fast enough, and it doesn't always build trust to talk about the thing you're going to do. So it's usually best to just go ahead and start doing it.
Very nice. Okay, so for those who are listening, either younger and just getting into the business, or people who want just a little insight into what other people do, what is your PR news source? Like from an industry standpoint, what do you have to look at? Is it PRSA newsletter? Is it PR News Today? I don't know what all the different websites are. What do you look to on a regular basis to kind of know what's happening in the industry?
Yeah, so my immediate diet is grotesque.
Okay.
It's intentionally broad, and so when it comes to like comms trade,
Yeah.
I'm not just PR Week and all those things. There's value in understanding what your peers are up to, but I'm just as interested in Ad Age and Digiday and like all the other kind of like all the other folks who are working on channel stuff,
Yeah.
because ultimately when you want to earn attention, you have to know like where that attention is and how to move it. Um, and that in addition to uh, journalism all day, all the subscriptions, invest in journalists. It's a good idea. We all need it. I I I take a lot of comfort in the fact that the internet is a place where we will still like recognize community and keep it together. These can be really small, informal things, but they can also be huge. Like, I'm amazed. It's 2024, and there are still people in communication roles who like don't understand how big a deal Reddit is. They'll talk about Google, they'll talk about YouTube, they'll talk about Meta all day long, but they'll pretend like there aren't folks organized around very specific topics having material, knowledgeable conversations. And you can discount anonymous strangers on the internet all day, but even as just a listening exercise, there's a lot to be learned by tuning in.
And I think those conversations on Reddit are much more honest and much more meaningful and much more accessible, truly.
Yeah,
So, yeah, for sure. I love Reddit.
there is a model. Some of our partner offices sustain this as a service to clients, where they basically run panels, research panels over time.
Yeah.
And so they'll stand those up just longitudinally. So it's usually a pretty good mix of stakeholders, but it's definitely like customer and non-customer who are available on an ad hoc basis to give reflective answers to questions that matter. And so for organizations that can stand that up and manage it over time, it doesn't have to feel like community. It can be transactional to the extent that there's value on both sides.
Right.
But yeah, the role of research as part of the management function of the organization is really hard to overstate. Yeah.
That's fun. All right. Let's talk about tech stack. Are you a Google shop, a Microsoft shop? Are you Zoom? Are you Teams? Is there some piece of software that like you have to have that like no one else knows about or you couldn't live without?
Well, I mean, for the agency owners, it's going to be for the agency owners who are still billing by the hour, it's how do you track your time?
Okay.
So we've used a lot of stuff there. We're using Harvest now. I think when it comes to the client facing and workflow, A good project manager is worth it, whether that's Monday.com or any of the others that really are about who's doing what by when.
Yeah.
There's a role for that piece too. And then in the productivity suite, it's always about the client, right? So while our teams are mostly Google, it's always interfacing with the client's environment. We've got governments that use a thing called box.com. Like you never know what cloud service is going to be foreground, and I think we've just grown to be flexible with living where we need to in terms of the tools and their domain, so that we can work together effectively.
I hear that a lot. We, as a consulting firm, do the same thing. We kind of meet clients where they are. I mean, I much prefer Zoom, but if you make me meet on Teams, I will.
Yep.
So I totally get it. All right, let's wrap with your mantra, the phrase that rings through your head every day, the thing that motivates you, the piece of advice you give others. What is that theme that moves you through life?
Well, that's a pretty existential question now, isn't it? I offered earlier, like in terms of PR, it's first do the right thing and then talk about it. Like that one sticks. I hope that's useful to people who are tuning in here. But for a little closer to me personally is, so I've always found a bicycle to be a machine for freedom since I could walk, right? You could always go further on two wheels. And I've always found it a useful lens for understanding kind of the space I inhabit in a way that's meaningful to me. And along the way, life on two wheels will teach you a lot of lessons. And the one I would offer at the top of the list is you go where you look. I don't know if you've ever done any like single track mountain biking in the woods, but like if you look at the rock or you look at the tree, you're going to hit the rock or the tree. If you look at the clean line, you're going to follow it. And so I think in a world full of uncertainty and in a world where fear seems to just be on top of everybody, seeing what you want, being able to visualize what you want and knowing who you can hold hands to get there with and keeping that front of mind is a really good way, not just to stay on task, but probably, get to your goals on time and on budget.
I love it. That is awesome, awesome advice. Ryan, thanks a ton for joining. We really appreciate it.
A great pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
This has been Insights to Communicate with Adam Probalski, president of the woman and Latina-owned market and opinion research firm, Probalski Research.